All right, we're gonna get ready to get started. Let's get ready for the next morning's track here. You're in track 13, so if you're in track 13, you're in the right place. We have an exciting presentation going on, but let me introduce you to our first speaker of track 13 here. We have here Wade Harper, right here to the left of me. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineer, licensed Professional Engineer, and Certified Master Black Belt with certifications Six Sigma, Lean, and Design from Six Sigma, while working with big companies such as Honeywell, Ford, Teva Pharmaceuticals, George Group, Accenture, and many other companies out there, and the U.S. Army. He's a member of ASQ, and he started his career as a process engineer designing welding process for nuclear weapons with Allied Signal, which is now Honeywell. Then he branched out to the automotive industry with Ford, and in addition to that, and while in Honeywell, he was actually working with Design for Six Sigma, and while in the George Group, he was teaching the U.S. Army across all nations, training. I mean, we're talking big numbers. 1,283 leaders, champions, 85 master black belts, he got certified, 1,300, basically 1,400 black belts, 3,800 green belts in a span of 2.5 years. Talk about a lot of training and certification you've been doing and traveling across all the U.S. Army sites out there. By the way, after working many years as a consultant in Georgia with the U.S. Army, then he went to be the director of continuous improvement at Teva Pharmaceuticals, where he went ahead and drove $167 million in continuous improvement deployments over 3 years, from 2010 to 2013, and also certified over 600 engineers in design for Lean and Six Sigma. So let's all welcome Wade Harper with the presentation today. All right.
Thank you, Angel. I feel like I need to run onto the field and break through the paper. So today, track 13, I want to go through the efficient process maps in a digital world. You know, we're probably all familiar with the post-it notes and stuff, so I'll kind of back up a little bit and do that. But my intent is to make you aware of a new method of Shingo-style process mapping. I've heard some of the people talk about Norman Boddick, all the Shingo books that he converted from Japanese to English, and how the Shingo style came about. And the biggest part of that is actually being able to do Shingo style in digitally, so hopefully help you out with that. If there's any time left over, we'll answer some questions. The typical Kaizen event that I have here that you see highlighted in yellow starts on Monday. Most of you are familiar with the acronym SIPOC, stands for supplier, who provides the inputs to the process, that provides the outputs to the customer, right? So what you may not be familiar with is the last one in that first column is adding process steps. The first one in the second column is adding operation steps. So you'll learn to know those as product flow versus process or workflow. But then on Tuesday, getting into all the details and typical things that we do in process mapping, root cause analysis, and then at the end of the day on Thursday, you start getting into the 2B process map. So, but I want to back up a little bit, as Angel talked about. Started my career as a process engineer, so I've been doing this a little bit, but back in the late 80s with the Six Sigma under Michael Harry. This actually comes out of Michael Harry's training material. I always struggled as a process engineer, what level of detail, most of us probably in this profession and as an engineer being a little anal retentive, where do I stop? How much detail do I put into a process map? Anybody struggle with that? Yeah. So as I map this process, do I map the product flow? Do I map the workflow? What exactly do I see here? And I started that way in the late 80s. And then Lean came along. So you got the three types of waste. You got the Mura, uneven workloads. We were doing that in the late 90s, the late 80s with the Six Sigma. You can see here, but what about the unreasonable workloads? If I've got the customer demand, is any of that unevenness exceed that customer demand. I've got it here with the time of 9. You look up above, none of those exceed that. Theory of constraints. I don't have any constraints as a problem. But lastly, as I wouldn't expect to see from a lean perspective, I don't see any of the Tim Wood or .wimp, whatever your acronym is. You know, about the best I could see is the rework up here in the Six Sigma days. Not a surprise there, right? And then with Shook's Learning to See in the late 90s, came out. I thought this was great from a manufacturing side of the business, the operations. What about the commercial side? I struggled with that. Same question. Am I mapping the product flow? Am I mapping the workflow? How much detail do I put into this process map? Same questions. What about the Mura? Uneven workloads. Yep, we got that. You would expect to see that. Unreasonable workloads. Again, this is straight out of the training material. I've got my customer demand, 18,400 pieces per month, but I've got my data boxes down below. Do I have a constraint? I really can't tell in this training material. And as you would expect to see in my MUDA, I see the transportation, I see inventory, I see weighting in the sawtooth down below. But what about overprocessing, overproduction, right? Some of those things are missing here. So with my objective, what I want to introduce you today is the Shingo style. And originated, I actually trained under Peter Daw, the author of the book that was released in 2015. And as you see in the quote here, Shigeo Shingo says, to make a fundamental improvement, we must distinguish product flow from the workflow. And if you understand Shigeo Shingo coming out of the automotive industry, and you understand production, you essentially see the production line here with the product flow. Is the product moving? If you look at a process map and you go left to right, the vehicle on the assembly line, it's in a staging area, it moves to the next place in the manufacturing production, work is performed on it, it's moved to the next place. So I have transportation, I have storage, and you see the flow from left to right of the product. And Shingo says, you know, the 4 types of process being the acronym PITS. So I actually have the process steps, the inspection, transportation, and storage. As Lean Six Sigma practitioners, you know only one of those is value added. The other 3 are non-value added. Now, while it's in a station, there's work being done on it. So this really helped me understand and do the level of detail is to break this down, look at product flow, then look at workflow, depending on what your purpose is. Color codes mean have a meaning. Are we actually working on material? Are we working on data? Project I have right now looking at nuclear waste through the nuclear weapons manufacturing. Most of this is data. The waste itself doesn't move very much, but oh my gosh, the data, right? There's a lot of that being captured. Shingo says, you know, in a Shingo style, I can actually track movement of people, information, material, and machines. A little bit more detail. Again, this is historically just been done on Post-it notes. And so you kind of see that here, left to right, the product flow up above. I've got the storage, I've got transportation, I've got process steps. And again, typical automotive manufacturing, you see people, I spent 4 years with Ford Motor Company. As that vehicle moves, people move to the vehicle to do work on it. So you see from the bottom of the page, the people moving up to it, doing the work until that job task while it's in station is completed. But it doesn't have to be manufactured. I come to here as a process engineer. We talk too much about manufacturing. You'll see my tagline is, you know, if you manage the process, you don't have to manage the people. We spend too much time as process practitioners managing people instead of managing processes. So from a Shingo style, I've got all my data over here on the right, but again, where's the Mura? I've got my elapsed time down below. I don't necessarily, when I get to the commercial side of the business, I can literally ask people, how long does this take? because they usually don't have data on the commercial side. And so they tell me, it takes this long. Well, what's interesting about that is they don't know that I'm baiting them. In the end, I know this process takes 128 days. They give me the elapsed time for each of these process steps. It takes 10 days. Now I've worked them into a corner. Where's the other 118 days? And they start scrambling. Well, maybe it takes longer than that, right? So I've got to find that. Unreasonable workloads. So as long as I have the customer demand, I can look, theory of constraints, where's my constraint? Simple enough, and that's just at the product flow level, not doing any work. And lastly, the Timwood. In the product flow, I've got transportation. I've got inventory down here with my yellow post-it notes. I can have inventory between process steps. I can have inventory in process steps. I can identify simply with the team where do I have excess motion. My waiting, I've got waiting in my storage steps as the product flow, but I've also got waiting down here in the workflow with my queue times. And if I have over-processing or over-production, I can note that. Inspection, not uncommon, that I'm inspecting more than I should be. That should be over-processing. But I always liked the Shingo style, as I was taught, to actually use yarn to identify where the defect is found and connect it back in the process where it's created. So it gives you an easy visual as to how far this defect has passed through the process before it gets found. Okay? Going back to the product flow, the 4 types of process steps in the acronym PITS. The color coding actually has a meaning. Green being the value add, the color of money. Purple, yellow, and blue being non-value add, but purple being the color of royalty, inspection, right? Yellow, transportation, think of a school bus. Blue, the color you turn as the blood stops flowing, right? So very quickly, with just the product flow, movement left to right, all I have to do is count my process steps, and I can put them into a Pareto, one of our sessions here, and see that most of my processes end up somewhere in transportation or storage. I typically find storage being a big one. And in this particular case that I'll get into, you'll see the data behind this. The distribution of those process steps, but again, I'm looking at Mura and Murray in the product flow, and I don't get into the Mura until I get into the workflow. But in this case, and this all comes out of Peter Gau's book, Shingo Style Process Mapping, you can see here, I've got my customer demand, I've got step 3 in this, obviously a constraint exceeding that demand. So I can tell that now I probably need to go into a little bit more depth and more detail in my process mapping to see where this is coming from. But I can do my capability analysis, do any statistical analysis like an ANOVA to see if it's statistically different. But then in doing so, now I can move things around. I've got even workflow, I don't have a constraint, and now my process is predictable. I mean, keep in mind some of our basic tools of capability. A prerequisite for capability is stability. I don't know how many times I see capability analysis and nobody's ever looked to see if the process is stable. Okay? How is that normally done non-digitally? As we've always had with post-it notes. I always try to tell them I don't have any stock in post-it notes, but my gosh, we'll go through a bunch of them, right? So across the top, as I said in my Kaizen event, I start left to right with the SIPOC. You can see that depicted here. I've got the supplier, my input, here's my process, here's my output, delivering to the customer. What is all of that? And just essentially ask the people, the frontline people, what do you do? And then what do you do? And then what do you do? And how does it get from there? So I get my transportation, I get my storage, where does it sit? And my cycle times kind of fall out of this. You see the yarn, the string going from defects. Always interesting, we find defects here that originate clear at the beginning, right? So this particular business development opportunity started here, made it all the way through the process before we found out it wasn't a good connection. So once I have all of that, I've got my elapsed times down here, helps me decide if I have any constraints. And then once we work through that on Thursday, we start with the future state map, pulling things off that we would expect the improvements to have an impact on. But again, this is the old way of doing that. I want to share some examples. So at the end of the Kaizen, I've got to take this, and I've had Kaizens that would, post-it paper that would be all the way down the length of this room, right? And that, this is not, how do I switch over? Well, I've got this up over here, but I've got to move it over there.
Here. You got it.
Okay? So now I take this Post-it paper and put it into PowerPoint, but two screens, I didn't work on that. Okay, so somewhere in this process, if somebody decides, well, we missed this step, well, I've got to go to page 5, move things to page 6, moves things from page 2, and all the time and the labor associated with that. At some point, same way whether this is in this particular case, that's not the one.
We'll go to the next page, or?
No, I've got the other PDFs on here, but they're not showing, I don't have it,
They're at the top of your screen.
which is off the
Yeah,
screen.
move them over, it's 2 screens, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
While I was doing that, what were the 4 elements of the workflow? It was people, material.
People, information, machines, and material.
You're not open to PDFs.
They're open.
Okay, gotcha. Let me see.
Okay, let's not spend any time on those. My point is, whether it's Visio or PowerPoint, just the labor. At some point, I said, I gotta start eating my own dog food. Here I am, an efficiency person, right? Spending days after a Kaizen documenting these things in Visio or Word. Okay? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay? So, and then eventually nobody works to a process map. So I gotta put these things into an SOP, right? So what you'll learn about Shingo style is it falls out into an SOP very easily. I'll make that point here. All of this is in the book. I'm not showing you anything that I've created. So there's a simulation in the Shingo style mapping. Template flows through the process. 2 circles are traced in red. 3 triangles traced in blue. The bow ties, 3 bow ties in green. This is the data I showed you earlier. You can see quickly that the step 3 is the constraint. How does that look in a Shingo map? Again, I've just got a piece of paper flowing through the process. So the paper moves, but while the paper's in station 1, somebody's doing work on it. They're making the red circles. It moves to the outbox of the step 1, stored in there until somebody pulls it out of there. So obviously a pull system. Create the 3 triangles. I've got my elapsed time down here. Very quickly I can see that I have uneven workloads. I've got my customer constraint up here of 12 seconds. And with a 30-second step 3, right? So I've got all my waste, transportation, I've got my whip, I can do all my calculations, and you see here very quickly 7.5% process cycle efficiency. But again, I've got all the opportunities for Timwood. But now that I've got the work mapped, and I knew my constraint was the bow ties, I can move my bow ties around. Now I'm no longer siloed with my workers doing particular jobs. They're all doing a little bit of everything. And I've now balanced my workload. I meet my constraint. I've created a pull system. And now I've got a 90% efficiency from 7.5% efficiency by dividing my product flow from my workflow. Okay? That's how I used to do it. But ultimately, the other objective I wanted to get to is how do we do that digitally now?
The name of my presentation is Efficient Process Maps in a Digital World. So let's go to the digital world. You'll see here my software opens up with IBM BlueWorks Live. But before I get started, I want to make the disclaimer that I have no financial benefit from recommending the book or the software. But the primary reasons I chose the software is it aligns closely with the book, and also the second thing is, as you see, it opens up into these tutorials. In a matter of 4 10-minute tutorials, 40 total minutes, you can have somebody up and proficient in using this software, and the payback is easily for an annual subscription made on a single Kaizen event, mapping that process and identifying the waste. So that's the point of my presentation, is to show you how efficient Shingo is and how this software can get you there even quicker. In IBM BlueWorks Live, we'll start with creating a new process map. They call them process blueprints in BlueWorks Live, and I'll just give it a title here, 2023 World Conference, for the sake of showing you how that works. And you'll see it opens up very quickly in the Shingo style, where I've got the flow across the left. IBM calls those milestones, but all I have to do is show the what's being done by clicking up here with adding milestones, and now I have the flow of what's being done to the product left to right. Remember, product doesn't mean necessarily manufacturing. It can be an invoice, it can be a contract, it can be a data call, an IT support ticket, whatever that is. Whatever's moving through your process, we're documenting it left to right, the flow of it through the process. And at each one of these is the how the work is done, are called activities, and I can just add those to any of these to add detail for how the work is being done to accomplish this particular milestone. But you'll notice here with the numbering, and I can turn that on and off at will, hide activity numbering. But you see that showing up over here to the left, that the standard operating procedure in Shingo lends itself to the SOP by, and I'll just turn those back on, is numbering section 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Behind each one of these is a lot more detail to each activity or milestone. I can identify the process owner, the participant who does the work, any systems or experts that might be able to help with that person, the cycle times that I'll show you here in a little bit that align with the previous presentation, full SIPOC capability, suppliers inputs out to customers, any risks associated with this process step, and whether it's value add or non-value add. And so again, all those details reside behind each one of these. So let's go back to the sandbox and open up the as-is map that we used in the previous presentation. You should see a direct alignment here. The transporting the template to the workstation, so the circle, draw the circle, it retrieves it from that stores and draws 2 circles, transports it to the outbox, which is the blue triangle's inbox. And blue triangle draws 3 triangles, very much in alignment with what you saw in the presentation. So what I wanted to show you here is now I've got the flow left to right. I've got the work being done in these process steps, but I can also do this analysis. Like I mentioned before, currently I've got 11 things selected. Let's turn all those off. But if I want to see who does the work, there's the blue triangle has 5 activities that they do, 5 for the blue bow tie. I can go down through here and see who is doing all the work. I can also identify the, as I talked about, it's since we're in a lean Six Sigma, what is the value add, non-value add? There's 4 value added steps, 14 non-value. I can see that summarized here, but I can also see it in the map over here. I can also look at cycle times. So very much like the previous maps, here's my cycle times for those process steps. And if you recall, the constraint was here in the bow tie. Here's my 30 seconds, comprised of 24 seconds work. These 8 seconds each to draw the bow ties, and 6 seconds of view time. So I can very easily look across here and see if anything exceeds my customer demand. So I have some Muri, but the unevenness, I've got the Mura, 6 seconds here, all the way to 30 seconds for my peak. So I've got uneven workloads, I've got unreasonable workloads, and I've also got the ability to look at my value add, non-value add, and find out exactly where those are through some further analysis that IBM doesn't have in there yet, but I do have a request to just add the 10 wood details in there, just like we do the value add, non-value add steps. So the other thing I wanted to show you is very quickly, let's turn off the analyze so I can do that, how this goes into a process diagram. Simple click. Now that I know who does the work, here's their swim lane and the work that they do. It goes to storage, and there's the inbox, outbox for storage. And I can scroll down through here and see the various handoffs. Being football season, anytime you have a handoff, you risk fumbling. I guess the football season just ended, but starting baseball either way. The other thing I wanted to show you is the single click to documentation. Looks just like an SOP, just because of the benefits of the Shingo mapping method. So 2 very simple clicks, and I've got the documentation that I used to spend hours afterwards creating. Now, as long as I create the discovery map, I automatically get a process diagram with flows and SOP just with a click for each. But just to show you the further detail in that, let's go to one I've already worked on is this management operating system change control board process, where I have a little bit more detail in each one of those activities. Standard SOP, I've got the purpose, scope, prerequisites, and here's 1.1 with a lot more detail. I can get into the decisions. If yes, go to 2.2. If no, go to 2.3. And you'll see that in the process diagram, where I can actually add that decision point, tell it which way to go, and that gets picked up in the SOP. So very efficient. Hopefully I've met my goal in sharing with you the efficiency of Shingo in separating product flow from workflow, and then combined with the IBM BlueWorks Live, we get very quickly our SOPs, PowerPoints, and as soon as I say that, I realize I didn't get those. Let's go to export this to PowerPoint, so you can get an idea of how easy that is. You'll see it pop up here. Let's open that file and drag it over here so you can see it. So there it is as a PowerPoint, and here's the process flow in PowerPoint as well. So you can make the presentation, and Same thing with the SOP, if I export it to Word, and let's turn off the details, that can be a little cumbersome at times, but I'm gonna keep the process diagram in there, export that. And here's my Word document. So again, there's the process map. Here's the standard operating procedure that I just showed you. And I'm ready to go and move on to the next process. So thanks for letting me share this with you. Hopefully I've met my goal in getting that, making you aware of how efficient this can be compared to how it's been in the past. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you soon. The name of my presentation is Efficient.
Okay, that's essentially my objective was to share Shingo with you, share how you might, after using Shingo in a Kaizen event, be much more efficient than I was over time by using the IBM BlueWorks Live product. And so my call to action to you is to learn how to create Shingo style process maps. Most of you are probably still doing the Six Sigma or learning to see methods. It just helped me understand where to draw the details, do the product, do the work, learn IBM BlueWorks Live, go conquer. Here's the links to both of those products. You can get Peter Gau's book, Shingo Style Process Mapping, a link to IBM BlueWorks Live. And you know, as a process engineer for 37 years and doing this, if you need help, let me know.
Thank you. We have a few questions though. We have 3 minutes. Any questions?
Kevin.
In this, is it taken for granted though that you have to really focus on a product or a service and following a single thing through the process like you would in a value stream map?
Absolutely. I mean, but I also find struggling with my customers a very basic question. What is it that's moving through your process?
So
And I get crickets.
Complex process.
I get crickets. There's got to be something moving through a process, or it's not a process, right? But to ask the customer what it is, I can't tell you the silence. What is it that's moving through your process? And on the manufacturing side, that's usually easy, but moving out of the operations into the commercial side, I mean, because so much of it's digital, but like you said with BD, it's moving so much of it from an inbox to an outbox, but something's still moving through the process, whether it's an invoice, whether it's a legal document. I mean, working with so many people as I did in George Group and everybody spoke several languages. I felt like I had to speak several, I do, I speak English and I speak process, that's it. So you're right, you have to know what's moving through the process, but I don't know how you start without knowing what it is that's moving through. Another question?
I guess what you talk about that in terms of reviewable processes, if it's like a document you're moving through this process, but it's a different type of doc, it's a different subject of document each time, do you find this will be effective for creating a reviewable process that way?
Well, that's true with manufacturing too, where you have the complexity of somehow you have to raise it up to see where it's common and see where those similar equipment, similar processes are. So you might have to break it down to bite-sized processes and an overarching, depending on the product, which processes get used. Does that help? Okay. How are we doing on time?
We got 1 minute. One more question?
Yeah, one.
Yeah.
Just how do you deal with processes that are very repetitive? They work for a couple hours a week or a few hours and then they go to something else. You collecting data, finding WIP.
No doubt. I mean, some of those, those are challenging, but we have to be creative and figure out how we can help them and what the focus is.
Thank you. Wade Harper. All right.